Ironclad drifted through the void like a drunk at closing time, aimless and slightly menacing, just the way Captain Drac liked it. The ship, a massive hunk of rust and ambition, was the classic example of practicality over aesthetics. Who needed beauty when you had firepower? The crew, a ragtag bunch of misfits and cutthroats, lounged about the ship, each as disreputable as the next. It was a lovely day for piracy. Captain Drac, a man whose face looked like it had been sculpted by a blind god with a vendetta, stood at the helm, surveying his realm with the satisfaction of a despot who'd perfected the art of controlled chaos. "All right, you scallywags," he barked at his crew. "Let's see if we can find ourselves some fresh pickings before the sun explodes, or something equally inconvenient." The crew, never one to do more work than necessary, nodded in vague agreement. This motley assembly of thieves and would-be merchants had found a peculiar harmony under Drac's iron rule. They knew the captain was as likely to stab you as promote you, often in that order. At the helm, Drac's first mate, a wiry woman named Sella, scratched at her chin with a knife that seemed sharp enough to shave atoms. "Captain, radar's picking up a blip," she said, her voice carrying a hint of sadistic glee. "Might be a colony transport or a very lost space whale." Drac chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Let's hope it's the former. We could use some new toys, and I'm not keen on whale steaks again." The blip on their radar turned out to be neither. As they closed in, it resolved into something unexpected, a sleek, single-occupant craft floating like a forgotten promise. The ship was the kind of thing you saw in recruitment holos, not drifting aimlessly through pirate territory. Aboard this shiny enigma was Valen Dart, a man whose reputation was as nebulous as the ship he rode. He was the sort of person who could walk into a room and make everyone else feel like they were overdressed, effortlessly confident, with an undercurrent of danger that he wore like a cologne. As Ironclad's grappling hook secured his ship, Valen leaned back in his chair, smirking. This was all part of the plan. Not that he had a plan per se, more of a general idea of not dying today. "Captain, someone's coming aboard," Sella said, her tone slipping from amused to suspicious. "And by the looks of him, he's either very brave or very stupid. Or both," Drac mused, eyeing the view screen. "Let's meet our guest, shall we?" The crew gathered at the docking bay, a grim welcome committee of scowls and ill will. Valen stepped through the airlock with the confidence of a man who still had all his limbs. "Nice place you've got here," he quipped, eyeing the rusting walls. "Very post-apocalyptic chic. Glad you like it," Drac replied, stepping forward. "We were going for abandoned scrapyard, but I think we've nailed your description better. I'm Captain Drac." "And you are?" Valen Dart, he said, offering a hand that was met with a skeptical glance. "I'm here for the scenery and the company, mostly the company." Drac didn't shake it. "Dart, huh, should I know the name?" Valen shrugged, a movement that suggested he didn't care if you knew him or not. "Depends on how many laws you've broken." "All of them," Drac replied, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Let's say you're someone worth knowing." The crew eyed Valen like they might eye a particularly interesting fungus. There was a charge in the air, a current of suspicion that could have powered the ship if properly harnessed. But Valen seemed unfazed, as if he thrived in environments where people contemplated murder as a hobby. "You got guts. I'll give you that," Sella said, her knife disappearing back into her boot. "But guts only get you so far," Valen smirked. "Good thing I brought charisma too," Drac laughed, a sound that could frighten small animals. "You've got a mouth on you, I like that, but this ship runs on more than charming words." Valen gestured expansively. "Happy to pitch in. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one." "Another philosopher," Sella muttered, rolling her eyes. "Just what we needed. Philosopher, poet, professional nuisance," Valen listed, ticking off each on his fingers. "I'm adaptable." Drac regarded Valen with a mixture of amusement and calculation. This stranger was trouble, that much was clear. Trouble had a way of being interesting, though, and Drac was nothing if not a connoisseur of interesting things. "All right, Dart," Drac said finally. "You can stay, but don't think I'm not watching you." I'm curious to see what you bring to the table. I look forward to exceeding your non-existent expectations, Valen replied, a grin stretching his face. With that, Valen Dart, enigma wrapped in a mystery stuffed into a spacesuit, was welcomed aboard Ironclad. It was the beginning of what would either be a beautiful friendship or a catastrophic disaster, and nobody was taking bets. The ship continued its aimless drift through the cosmos, like a predator looking for the next meal. In Valen Dart, it had found something new to chew on. Whether Ironclad and its crew would swallow him whole or be consumed in turn was anyone's guess. Either way, Captain Drac was ready for the ride. And if there was one thing Drac understood, it was that the best stories were those with uncertain endings. Valen Dart leaned back against the rust-streaked bulkhead of the Ironclad, his easy grin plastered across his face as if it were a fixture. In the few days since he'd joined the crew, he'd managed to unsettle just about everyone aboard, mostly by doing absolutely nothing useful. It was a gift, really. Captain Drac, for all his rugged ugliness and ironclad arrogance, ran a tight ship. A ragged crew of alien misfits with enough firepower to make a small moon weep with envy, Ironclad was the perfect vessel for piracy. Or it had been, until Valen had made himself at home. "So, what's the plan today?" Valen asked, trying not to sound too bored. He was pretty sure they didn't have a plan, just like every other day on this rust bucket. Sella glared at him with the intensity of a supernova. "The plan is for you to stay out of the way. We're gearing up to hit a supply convoy and we don't need your meddling." Meddling. Valen feigned innocence. "I was under the impression I was contributing to our headaches," muttered Grom, the ship's engineer. Grom was an alien whose face resembled a cross between a squid and a piece of industrial machinery. "You've got a knack for turning smooth sailing into a cosmic train wreck." To be fair, Valen did have that knack. His first attempt at helping had resulted in the ship losing power mid-raid. Nothing quite like the element of surprise when your ship suddenly goes dark in the middle of a heist. Sella had been delighted. "Look, I'm here to help," Valen persisted, his tone dripping with sincerity like sarcasm's sleazy cousin. "Just tell me what you need. I'm practically a Swiss Army knife of talents." "Swiss Army knife, maybe," Sella grunted, "but more like the corkscrew. Mostly useless and liable to get things stuck." Valen chuckled, the sound irritatingly pleasant given the company. "I can live with that." The crew was assembling in the common room, a generous term for the space that smelled like a landfill on a hot day. Drac stood at the head, his presence gravitating attention whether you wanted it or not. Valen watched as the crew shuffled in, each one carefully avoiding eye contact with their strange new addition. "All right, listen up," Drac announced, his voice like gravel being poured into a blender. "We've got intel on a convoy coming through Sector 7. Easy pickings if we play it right." "Easy pickings, huh?" Valen chimed in from the back, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "You sure you want me to join the party, or should I just take notes?" "Oh, you'll be joining," Drac replied without missing a beat. "I want you right where I can see you." "Nothing like keeping your enemies close, right?" "Enemies?" Valen raised an eyebrow, grinning. "I thought we were friends." Drac's laugh was more of a bark. "Call it what you want, Dart. But if you screw this up, I'll make sure you're thrown out an airlock with a polite thank you." The crew exchanged glances, a mix of amusement and vague unease. They'd never met anyone quite like Valen Dart before. To be fair, neither had Valen. The plan was simple enough. Intercepting a convoy of 3 ships, heavily laden with supplies but light on defenses. It should have been like taking candy from a baby. Assuming, of course, that baby didn't have a habit of exploding at inconvenient moments. As the Ironclad made its approach, Valen found himself in the engine room, ostensibly to assist Grom. The engineer wasn't exactly thrilled, his tentacles twitching in what Valen assumed was irritation. "Just don't touch anything." Grom's voice was a mix of mechanical whirs and clicks, his alien anatomy an engineer's nightmare. "Wouldn't dream of it," Valen replied, hands conspicuously in his pockets. Just watching the magic happen. Grom rolled what might have been his eyes. "Watching, sure. I know your type, Dart. Wreck everything and call it innovation. Valen grinned. Innovation's just failure with good PR. The first ship in the convoy loomed ahead, its hull gleaming in the darkness of space. Ironclad's targeting systems locked on, weapons humming with lethal anticipation. Valen watched the proceedings with the detachment of a man who'd seen more than his share of chaos. Engage, Drax's command rang through the ship, a call to arms that sent a ripple of excitement through the crew. And then nothing happened. The ironclad shuddered, lights flickering ominously. Grom cursed, a string of alien invective that Valen assumed was best left untranslated. What's wrong? Drax's voice crackled over the intercom, a mixture of anger and confusion. Targeting's down, Grom reported, frantically adjusting the controls. We've got a complete systems glitch. Glitch. Valen couldn't help but chuckle. Sounds like you've got a case of Valen was here. Grom shot him a glare that could have melted tungsten. I swear if you did anything. Hey, innocent until proven guilty, Valen replied with a shrug, though his eyes twinkled with mischief. The ironclad drifted, a predator with a chipped fang, while the convoy slipped past, blissfully unaware of their near miss with piracy. The crew's frustration was palpable, a simmering stew of anger and disbelief. In the aftermath, Valen found himself cornered by Sella, her knife once again finding comfort in her grasp. She regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant admiration. You've got a strange way of making friends, Dart, she said, the blade glinting dangerously. Valen shrugged, nonchalant. What can I say? I'm an acquired taste, acquired like a rash, Sella shot back. Your bad luck wrapped in charm. Maybe I'm just what you needed, Valen replied, undeterred. Things were getting too predictable around here, predictable. Sella's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. We're pirates, not accountants. Predictability gets us paid. Valen nodded, a sage nod that seemed out of place on a face that never took anything seriously. Maybe. But then you'd miss out on the fun. Sella echoed, incredulous. We lost out on a haul because of you, true, Valen admitted. But look on the bright side. We're all still breathing. And you've got a story to tell. Sella's eyes narrowed, the knife disappearing back into her boot. Just remember, Dart. Breathing's a privilege on this ship, not a right. Duly noted, Valen replied, saluting casually. I'll try not to wear out my welcome. As she left, Valen leaned back against the wall, contemplating the chaos he'd wrought with a certain amount of pride. Captain Drax's crew was cautious now, their suspicion a living thing that danced between them like a shadow. Valen had a knack for this kind of thing, turning a settled situation on its head. Pirates, as it turned out, didn't appreciate surprises that didn't end with them getting rich. Who knew? Drax found him later, his expression one of calculated annoyance. You've managed to do something I didn't think possible, Dart. You've made my crew nervous, Valen shrugged. I aim to please. Drax eyed him warily as if trying to decide whether to throw him out the nearest airlock or recruit him to the cause. I don't know what your game is, but we'll be watching you. Watching's good, Valen conceded. Keeps me honest. Drax's laugh was dry, devoid of humor. Honest. Right. Just don't forget you're on thin ice. The thinnest, Valen agreed, his grin never faltering. But you know what they say about ice. It's only a problem if you fall through. Drax shook his head, his eyes a storm of conflict. Just stay out of the way, Dart. Or you'll find out how cold space can be. With that he turned, leaving Valen alone with his thoughts and the distant hum of the engine. Valen watched him go, his expression thoughtful. Maybe he'd worn out his welcome faster than anticipated. But then again, maybe that was the point. Adaptable after all. The ironclad continued its aimless drift through the cosmos, its crew caught between suspicion and curiosity. Valen Dart was a wild card, an anomaly in a world of hard edges and sharper knives. As the days turned into weeks, his presence began to knit itself into the fabric of the ship's routine, like a loose thread in a well-worn tapestry. And while Captain Drax and his crew might not have trusted him, they couldn't quite bring themselves to eject him into the void. There was something about Valen that was endearing in a grating sort of way. As for Valen, he was content to let things play out. He'd been in worse situations, though not many, and at the very least he was having fun, something that was in short supply in a universe where survival was often the best you could hope for. He wandered the halls of the Ironclad, chatting up crew members with his peculiar brand of charm, leaving a trail of confusion and annoyance in his wake. It was a talent, really, one he'd honed over years of practice. Grom, meanwhile, continued to mutter about system glitches and sabotage, casting dark looks in Valen's direction whenever he thought the human wasn't looking. Sella maintained her wary distance, her knife always within reach, while Drac kept a close eye on the newcomer, his expression one of perpetual suspicion. But for all their misgivings, the crew couldn't deny that Valen brought something to the table, even if it wasn't what they'd wanted. A reminder, perhaps, that the universe was full of surprises, and not all of them ended in disaster. As for Valen, he was content to let the pieces fall where they may, confident that he'd land on his feet. He always did, and who knew? Maybe he'd find a place here, amidst the rust and firepower. Or maybe he'd move on, leaving chaos in his wake like a comet trailing debris. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't really matter. The universe would keep spinning, and Valen Dart would keep finding new ways to make mischief. It was what he did best, after all. The Ironclad, a hulking relic of rust and ambition, continued its journey through the void, a beacon of chaos in the endless darkness. And somewhere aboard, a man named Valen Dart grinned into the void, ready for whatever came next. The Ironclad chugged along, a spacefaring junkyard, its crew more like a band of misfit toys than seasoned pirates. Captain Drac, nursing the kind of headache that only an enigma like Valen Dart could induce, hatched a plan. It was a desperate maneuver, really, like trying to wrangle a greased eel with a bad attitude. But Drac was nothing if not persistent. "All right, listen up," Drac barked, his gravelly voice echoing across the common room. The crew gathered, a motley collection of mismatched limbs and dubious intentions. "We've got a problem, and it's not just that we're running low on booze." Grom's tentacles twitched in agreement, his mechanical vocal cords humming. "Aye, the man's got a point. Valen Dart's been nothing but trouble since he set foot on this rust bucket." Sella, sharpening her knife with a focus that suggested she'd rather be sharpening it on Valen, piped up. "He's a walking disaster. It's not just the systems he glitches, it's the way he talks, the way he moves, like he's got some kind of cosmic prank planned and we're the punchline." "Exactly," Drac agreed, nodding at Sella like she just proposed mutual piracy with a side of sanity. "Which is why it's time to take action." A murmur spread through the crew. Even Valen, who was lounging in the corner with a casual indifference that made him all the more infuriating, cocked an eyebrow. "Action, huh? Sounds ominous. What's the plan? Tie me to the mast and hope I get seasick." "Close," Drac said with a smirk that suggested he'd thought about it. "We're setting a trap, something simple. Something you won't see coming." Valen chuckled, a sound that grated on nerves like sandpaper on a sunburn. "Good luck with that. I've been dodging traps since I learned to walk." Drac leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a game, Dart. You mess with my ship, my crew, and there'll be hell to pay." Valen's grin widened. "Sounds fair, but you know hell's overrated. Just a lot of fire and screaming, really." With a dismissive wave, Drac signaled the meeting's end. The crew dispersed, a mix of wariness and anticipation hanging in the air like the smell of burnt toast. Valen lingered, watching Drac with the kind of interest usually reserved for a particularly complex puzzle. "You think this'll work?" Sella asked, falling into step with Drac as they moved toward the bridge. "I hope so," Drac replied, glancing back to ensure Valen wasn't eavesdropping. A futile effort, considering Valen's knack for being everywhere and nowhere at once. "We'll set up a distraction, something to draw him in, and then we'll see how clever he really is." Sella nodded, her knife disappearing into her boot with the ease of practice. "He's got more lives than a cat with a gambling problem. But maybe this time we'll catch him." Meanwhile, Valen wandered the ship's corridors, a bemused expression on his face. The crew's plan was almost adorable in its simplicity, like watching a toddler try to build a sandcastle with a fork. He had to give them credit for effort, though. If nothing else, they were persistent. The ironclad's engine room was a symphony of clanking and hissing, the kind of noise that would drive most people mad. For Grom, it was a lullaby, his tentacles dancing over the controls with practiced ease. Valen leaned against the doorway, watching the engineer work with interest. "Hey, Grom," Valen called, his voice cutting through the mechanical cacophony. "How's our favorite engine room today?" Grom barely glanced up, his annoyance palpable. "Fine, until you showed up. What do you want, Dart?" "Just checking in," Valen said with a nonchalance that suggested he was anything but. Making sure you haven't blown us all into space dust." Grom grunted, a sound that could have been agreement or exasperation, or both. "I manage without your help, thank you very much." Valen chuckled, sauntering over to inspect a particularly complex array of wires and blinking lights. "Looks like you've got things under control, for now." Grom's eyes, if that's what they were, narrowed. "What are you really after, Valen?" Valen shrugged, an infuriatingly casual gesture. "Just trying to survive another day in paradise." The trap, when sprung, was less a snare and more a minor inconvenience, like finding a spider in your spacesuit. Drac had instructed the crew to leave a tempting piece of tech out in the open, something shiny and mysterious enough to draw Valen in. Valen, of course, had seen it coming a mile away. He'd only pretended to take the bait out of curiosity, like a cat batting at a toy mouse, knowing full well it wasn't real. When the alarms blared, Valen was already 3 steps ahead, slipping through the ironclad's winding corridors with a grace that belied his reputation as an agent of chaos. He danced past the crew's attempts to corner him, ducking into maintenance shafts and emerging in unexpected places like a mischievous ghost. Drac, monitoring the chaos from the bridge, ground his teeth in frustration. "He's making fools of us, Sella. I swear he's enjoying this." Sella wedged into a narrow passageway with her knife at the ready side. "Of course he is. This is his idea of a good time." Valen, meanwhile, was busy turning the ship into his personal playground. He'd learned the ironclad's layout quicker than anyone had anticipated, using its quirks and hidden nooks to his advantage. It was almost like the ship wanted to hide him, sick of being just another set piece in this cosmic comedy. Eventually, Valen ended up in the engine room again, grinning at Grom like they were old friends. "Got a little loud out there," he said, feigning innocence. "Mind if I hide out here for a bit?" Grom's tentacles twitched, irritation simmering beneath his composed exterior. "Do what you want, Dart. Just don't touch anything." Valen leaned against the wall, observing the engineer at work. "No promises," he said, his tone mischievous. The ironclad's crew regrouped, licking their wounds and nursing their bruised egos. Drac's frustration was palpable, his plan having fallen apart before it even began. He gathered the crew once more, his expression dark. "All right, we underestimated him," Drac admitted, an edge of reluctant respect in his voice. "He's slippery, I'll give him that. But we'll catch him eventually." Sella, leaning against a bulkhead with her arms crossed, smirked. "Eventually? I don't think Valen does eventually. He's more of an all-or-nothing kind of guy." "Then we'll have to be smarter," Drac said, determination stealing his voice. "He wants to play games, fine, but this isn't over." Valen, listening in from the shadows, couldn't help but smile. He'd always enjoyed a challenge, and it looked like the crew of the ironclad wasn't about to give up easily. Good. It would give him something to do while he figured out his next move. As the crew dispersed, Valen slipped away, leaving them to their discussions and strategies. For now, he was content to let them think they had the upper hand. But Valen Dart was nothing if not adaptable, and he had a few tricks up his sleeve yet. The ironclad continued its slow journey through the void, a ship with a crew caught between suspicion and begrudging admiration for the wild card in their midst. Captain Drac's trap had failed, but it had only served to deepen the mystery surrounding Valen Dart. As for Valen, he wandered the ship with a renewed sense of purpose. He'd always thrived on chaos, and the ironclad was as good a playground as any. If nothing else, it was a hell of a lot more interesting than the alternatives. And so, the dance continued, a game of cat and mouse with no clear winner. The crew watched Valen with a mix of wariness and curiosity, wondering what he'd do next. Whatever it was, they were sure of one thing: it wouldn't be boring. Valen, for his part, was content. The universe was a big place, and there were plenty of opportunities for someone with his particular talents. For now, he'd enjoy the ride, leaving a trail of confusion and bemusement in his wake. It was, after all, what he did best. In the end, the ironclad was still a pirate ship, its crew still a ragtag band of misfits trying to make their way in a universe that didn't much care whether they lived or died. But now, they had an unpredictable element in their midst, a wild card that could tip the balance at any moment. And Valen Dart was just getting started. The ironclad's crew found themselves in a bind tighter than a tourniquet on a severed limb. Supplies were dwindling faster than the collective patience aboard the ship. Captain Drac paced the bridge, his boots echoing like a death knell on the cold metal floor. The crew watched him, their eyes a mix of hope and fear, as if expecting him to pull a miracle out of a non-existent hat. "All right, listen up," Drac barked, more out of habit than necessity. Everyone was already listening. When your next meal depended on it, you tended to pay attention. We've got less food than a monastery after a famine and fuel reserves that'll get us about as far as a snail with a leg cramp. Sella, still sharpening her knife with a zeal that suggested she'd soon contemplate using it on more than just inanimate objects, snorted. "Are we supposed to eat our own cynicism, Captain? Because if so, we'll be fed for years." The grim chuckle that spread through the room was more an affirmation than an answer. Valen Dart, lounging with the kind of relaxed arrogance that screamed irritatingly untouchable, offered his own brand of sardonic humor. "Don't worry, Sella. If we get desperate, I'm sure you could find a few tasty morsels lurking in the corners. Maybe even fry up those screws-in bolts you keep so close." "Keep it up, Dart, and you'll be the main course," Sella shot back, though there was a spark of amusement in her eyes. The crew had grown to expect Valen's antics, if not exactly love them. Drac grunted, annoyance etched into every crevice of his face. "Enough. Joking about it won't fill our tanks or our stomachs. We've got a plan." "It's risky, but since when have we ever been careful?" Rom's mechanical vocal cords emitted a noise somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "Define risky, Captain. You're talking like we're about to raid a galactic surveillance outpost or something equally suicidal." "Funny you should mention that," Drac said, his lips curling into a grin that could only be described as maniacal. "Turns out there's one right in our path." That got their attention. Eyes widened, mouths dropped, and a collective "what the hell" hung in the air. Sella's knife paused mid-stroke. "You're serious? An outpost? That's not just risky, that's straight-up lunacy." "Lunacy, yes, but necessary lunacy," Drac replied, a gleam of desperation in his eyes that was hard to ignore. "They're sitting on a stash of supplies, and they're not exactly expecting a visit from us. We hit them hard, we take what we need, and we're ghosts before they know what's hit them." Valen leaned forward, his interest piqued. "And the part where they retaliate with a fleet of warships, what's the plan there? Charm them with your winning personality." Drac shot him a look that could melt steel. "We'll burn that bridge when we get to it. Any objections, or are we all as desperate as I think we are?" The silence was deafening. Desperation had a funny way of muting protests. Grom's tentacles squirmed restlessly. "Well, I suppose if we're going out, might as well do it with style. I'll get the engine prepped." "That's the spirit," Drac said, clapping Grom on the back with enough force to loosen a few bolts. "Sella, get the weapons hot. Valen, try not to screw anything up." Valen's grin was the kind that suggested he'd already planned exactly how to do just that. "No promises, Captain. I'll do my best, though." He stood, stretching languidly, as if preparing for a casual stroll rather than a potentially suicidal mission. The ironclad's bridge buzzed with activity, the crew moving with a frenetic energy that belied their underlying tension. Hope, desperation, and a dash of madness, just the right ingredients for a pirate's last stand. Hours later, the ironclad slid through the darkness, an ugly blip on the radar of the unsuspecting outpost. Drac stood at the helm, eyes locked on the gleaming structure looming ahead. It was a monument to galactic authority, all shiny metal and blinking lights, a stark contrast to their rust-riddled vessel. "Look at that," Sella said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Like a floating palace just waiting to be raided." "More like a floating death trap," Valen remarked, earning him a sharp glance from Drac. "Keep your doubts to yourself, Dart. We're committed now. No turning back." Valen shrugged, unfazed. "Hey, I'm just saying those turrets look awfully unfriendly. But if you say we can do it, who am I to argue?" Drac ignored him, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Grom, how's the engine looking? Can we punch it if things go south?" Grom's tentacles worked in a blur, adjusting knobs and flicking switches. "She'll hold together, Captain." "Barely. But we'll need to be quick." "Quick is my middle name," Drac said, though the tightness of his voice suggested otherwise. "All right, people, let's make this count." As the ironclad drew closer, Valen watched the outpost with a sense of detached curiosity. He'd seen plenty of combat, though usually from a safe distance. This time, it seemed, he'd be right in the thick of it. The ship rocked slightly as they docked, the metal clanging with a finality that sent a jolt of adrenaline through the crew. Drac turned to his crew, resolve etched into his features. "Let's move. Grab what you can, get back fast. And for the love of all that's holy, don't get caught." Valen followed the crew as they poured into the outpost, his steps light and purposeful. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Like most things in his life, he preferred to figure it out as he went along. The outpost was a labyrinth of sterile corridors and clinical white walls, a far cry from the gritty reality of the ironclad. Valen moved with the rest, eyes scanning for anything useful. His gaze snagged on a room marked supply. "Well, well," he muttered to himself, pushing the door open with the tip of his boot. Jackpot! The room was filled with crates of various sizes, marked with symbols that screamed valuable to anyone with half a brain. Valen grinned, a little thrill of satisfaction curling in his gut. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. He worked quickly, prying open crates, revealing a bounty of food, fuel canisters, and other essentials. It was almost too easy, until the alarms blared, slicing through the air like a knife. "Perfect," Valen sighed, grabbing what he could and bolting for the exit. Couldn't just be simple, could it? The corridors filled with the sound of shouting and running boots, and Valen's heart pounded in time with the chaos. He barely made it to the docking bay, skidding to a halt just as the crew was scrambling back onto the ironclad. Drac was yelling orders, his voice hoarse and raw with urgency. "Move it, move it. We're not sticking around for afternoon tea." Valen tossed his haul onto the ship, sliding in behind it with seconds to spare. The ironclad's engines roared to life, and they lurched away from the outpost, the sounds of enemy fire echoing in their wake. The crew held their breath, each second stretching into eternity as they waited for the inevitable retaliation. But somehow, miraculously, they made it out, the outpost shrinking into the distance until it was nothing but a speck against the velvet backdrop of space. Cheers erupted, the kind that came from the gut, fueled by relief and disbelief. Drac let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, turning to face his motley crew. "We did it," he said, a grin breaking through his gruff exterior. "We actually bloody did it." Sella looked at Valen, shaking her head. "I hate to say it, but you might just be our lucky charm, Dart." "Luck's got nothing to do with it," Valen replied, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "Just a healthy dose of chaos and a bit of charm." Grom's laugh was a mechanical rumble. "I'll drink to that if we ever get more booze." Drac clapped Valen on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie and gratitude. "You came through, Dart. Maybe you're not as useless as you pretend to be." Valen shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. "I aim to please. Keeps life interesting." As the ironclad sailed on, the threat of starvation and immobility temporarily averted, the crew settled back into their routines, their spirits buoyed by their unexpected success. They'd raided a galactic outpost and lived to tell the tale, a feat that would no doubt become legend among the stars. For now, though, they were content to bask in their victory, even if it was shadowed by the knowledge that retaliation was likely not far behind. But that was a problem for another day. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Valen leaned against a bulkhead, a thoughtful expression on his face. The universe was still as unpredictable as ever, but for the first time in a long time he didn't mind. He had a ship, a crew that tolerated him more than most, and a knack for getting into and out of trouble. As far as he was concerned, that was enough. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, the ironclad was exactly where he was meant to be. The ironclad buzzed with a mix of triumphant adrenaline and the lingering stench of desperation, like a bar fight that had ended with all the bartenders unconscious and the patrons still thirsty. The crew lingered in the bridge, riding the high of their successful raid. A moment of victory, sure, but you could practically smell the apprehension wafting in with the recycled air. Captain Drac stood with his back to the crew, eyes fixed on the dwindling outpost behind them. He wore a smile that was more grimace than grin, like a man who'd managed to bluff his way out of a death sentence, only to find out he'd been sentenced to a lifetime of chess with an AI that took pleasure in dragging out matches. Well, that was a thing, Valen Dart drawled from his post, leaning back with an insolence that could only be described as practiced. Nothing like ransacking a peacekeeping outpost to really get the blood pumping, though I'd suggest we don't add war criminals to our resumes just yet. Stop whining, Dart. We got what we needed, Drax snapped, though the fire in his voice had dimmed somewhat. Even if you have an odd way of helping out, Valen shrugged as if he were wearing a coat of indifference 2 sizes too large. I prefer to think of it as creative contribution. Besides, what's life without a little chaos, eh? Sella, still wiping the drying blood off her knife with a cloth that was more stained than fabric, chimed in. You mean besides shorter? I'm not sure we should thank the universe for making you our mascot of mayhem. Chaos is a good motivator, Valen replied with a wink, earning him a glare that could have melted starship hulls faster than a solar flare. Grom, fiddling with the engine controls, turned his attention from his beloved dials. His mechanically enhanced voice resonated with a metallic thrum. Chaos doesn't pay the bills, Valen. And it sure doesn't fix the engines. True, Valen conceded, but it does get the adrenaline flowing. And isn't that what we're really here for? Sella snorted, an icy laugh that sliced through the air. Speak for yourself. I prefer a bit more predictability with my meals and sleep. The atmosphere of camaraderie, or at least the semblance of it, was starting to fade, replaced by a creeping realization that the raid had only delayed the inevitable. Supplies were aboard, but so was the specter of retaliation. Nothing sobers up a pirate crew faster than the thought of retribution hanging over them like the proverbial sword of Damocles. Drac turned, his expression set to serious leader mode, a setting he was increasingly relying on these days. All right, listen up. We've got what we came for, but we've also probably annoyed every authority within several parsecs. We need to lay low, stay out of sensor range until things blow over. That's assuming they decide to let things blow over, Sella pointed out, her knife now embedded in the table for emphasis. Might be they'd rather blow us over instead. Which is why we keep moving, Drac insisted, though even he sounded like a man talking himself into believing his own words. Grom, get us a trajectory that'll keep us off the radar. Aye, Captain. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, Grom replied, though his tone suggested he was also running out of patience and viable options. Valen couldn't help himself clearly. Tricks? I thought sleeves were for cards, not tentacles. Grom's mechanical laugh was a clattering sound, somewhere between amusement and the revving of an old engine. Cards, tentacles, as long as we don't fold. Drac couldn't afford to show doubt, but doubt was exactly what had crept into the heart of the crew, tick-like in its persistence. As the ironclad glided through the inky void, the silence was filled with more than just the ambient whir of machinery. Tension brewed, simmering like a particularly volatile stew. Valen, sensing the unease he'd played no small part in stirring, decided to fan the flames of it a bit more. "So, Captain, what's Plan B? Or are we all in on Plan A, which, if I'm correct, was hope like hell?" Drax shot him a glare, his temper flickering like an old-school fuse box. "Plan B is to survive, Dart. Something you'd better get used to if you want to keep drawing breath." Comforting, Valen thought. But he kept that one to himself. Even he knew there were times to poke the bear and times to let it slumber. Sella, ever the cynic, leaned forward, her sharp gaze a scalpel. "We might want to start thinking about what to do when, not if, our luck runs out." Drax straightened, projecting confidence like a salesman hawking faulty merchandise. "Our luck doesn't run out, we make it. We take risks, we adapt, and we come out on top. And if we don't," Sella pressed, her voice icy enough to give frostbite to the burning question she posed. "Then we die," Drax replied bluntly, his expression unreadable. "But not today. Today we live." Valen wasn't sure how that sat with him. He danced with death enough times to learn its rhythm, but it was a dance he preferred to lead. The idea of following someone else's steps towards oblivion wasn't exactly comforting. But the thrill, that was something he couldn't shake. The ironclad sailed through the vast emptiness of space, a rusted needle threading its way through the fabric of the universe, accompanied only by the unsung chorus of clinking machinery and the silent screams of distant stars. All the while, Valen watched as Drax clung to the semblance of leadership like a man gripping a lifeline, unaware that the line was fraying. Iors bled into days, the monotony of travel interspersed with the occasional bout of paranoia-induced bickering. The crew's initial euphoria faded to a tired tension, like a runner who had realized the finish line was a mirage. Valen took to wandering the ship, a restless ghost haunting the corridors. Sella found him in the mess hall, twisting a spoon between his fingers as if it could unlock the secrets of his restlessness. "Still sulking about the captain's lack of planning?" she asked, her voice equal parts mockery and curiosity. "Just pondering," Valen replied, not looking up. "Thinking about what happens next, planning to jump ship?" she probed, trying to sound nonchalant but missing the mark. Valen chuckled, a faint glimmer of mirth in his eyes. "And miss out on this ragtag circus of chaos? Not a chance." Sella allowed herself a small smile, though it was tempered by the ever-present cynicism. "Good. I'd hate to have to chase you down. That's assuming you could catch me," Valen shot back, his grin widening. "Don't test me," Sella warned, though the threat was softened by the banter. "I've never lost a mark." The camaraderie was short-lived, interrupted by the sudden blare of alarms that set the ironclad humming with urgency. Valen raised an eyebrow, his earlier musings forgotten. "Looks like our friends have come calling," he remarked, his words almost lost amid the din. Drax's voice crackled over the intercom, an edge of panic veiling his authoritative tone. "All hands to battle stations. We've got company." Valen and Sella exchanged a glance, the shared understanding of two people who'd seen their share of scrapes. The universe had a funny way of not letting them rest. As they rushed to their stations, the ironclad shuddered, the ship practically vibrating with the anticipation of conflict. Valen slid into his seat, the controls a familiar comfort despite the chaos. "Let's see what they've brought to the party," he muttered, his fingers dancing over the console as enemy ships appeared on the radar, clustered like vultures circling a particularly delicious kill. Grom's voice boomed over the intercom, the sound of his fingers manipulating the controls like a concert pianist playing a particularly brutal symphony. "Engines are primed, Captain. We can outrun them if we push it. Or we can stand and fight," Drax countered, his voice a harsh whisper over the comms. "We've gotten out of worse scrapes before." "True," Valen said, "but most of those scrapes didn't involve an armada of pissed-off peacekeepers." Drax's silence was telling, a moment stretched too long, filled with the weight of decisions and the consequences that followed. "We fight," he finally said, his voice a blend of determination and desperation. "We hit them hard and fast. Take out their lead ship and the rest might scatter." Valen shook his head, a wry smile playing at his lips. "Might is the operative word." Sella's voice cut through the chatter, cool and collected. "Then let's hope our might is stronger." The ironclad roared to life, a beast awakened, engines blazing as it turned to face its pursuers. The ship had never been about finesse or subtlety. It was a hammer, and today it was looking to smash. As the first shots fired, Valen felt the old thrill, the rush of adrenaline that came with dancing on the knife's edge. He grinned, teeth bared like a wolf scenting blood. "Let's give them a show," he said, fingers flashing over the controls as the ironclad surged forward, guns blazing. The battle was a chaotic ballet of fire and fury, the ironclad weaving through the enemy formation with a grace that belied its battered exterior. Valen worked the controls with an artist's eye, turning the ship into a weapon of improbable elegance. But every dance has its missteps, and the ironclad was no exception. The enemy was relentless, their formation tightening like a noose, and the ironclad was caught in its grip. Drac barked orders, his voice raw and ragged as the enemy closed in. "Focus fire on their lead ship. We take it down, we break their formation." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was their only ally. The crew worked in unison, a symphony of chaos and courage, each member playing their part in the unfolding drama. As the seconds ticked by, Valen found himself wondering if this was the end. If the ironclad would be their tomb, a monument to hubris and misplaced confidence. But then, miraculously, the enemy's lead ship buckled under the ironclad's onslaught, a flower of fire blooming in the cold void. The formation wavered, the enemy ships hesitating long enough for the ironclad to slip through the cracks. Drac let out a ragged cheer, the sound echoed by the crew. They had done it. Against all odds they had survived. For now. As the enemy ships retreated, licking their wounds, Valen leaned back, sweat trickling down his face. The victory felt hollow, a temporary reprieve in a universe where lasting peace was a fairy tale. The crew gathered on the bridge, their relief tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. They had bought themselves time, but at a cost. "What now, Captain?" Sella asked, her voice low, her knife back in her hand as if she needed its solid reassurance. Drac looked around at his crew, his eyes weary but determined. "Now we find a place to hide, to regroup. We've won the battle, but the war is far from over." Valen watched the stars slip past the viewport, the vastness of space a constant reminder of the challenges ahead. But for now they were alive, and that was enough. "Here's to the next round," he said, raising an imaginary glass. "May we survive long enough to regret it." The crew laughed, a grim, shared humor that carried them through the darkness, the ironclad racing toward an uncertain future. The ironclad limped away from the skirmish, a wounded beast masking its pain behind bravado and engine fire. Inside, the crew was more ragged than victorious, bodies dragging through the corridors like the aftermath of a bender with bad booze and worse anecdotes. Captain Drac stood on the bridge, staring at the projected star maps with a gaze that could curdle milk. "We need a plan," he growled, as if he could intimidate the universe into compliance. "And we need it fast." Valen leaned against the wall, arms crossed, projecting the easy confidence of a man whose last good idea was probably a bad one. "I've got a plan," he said, smiling like a fox with its tail caught in a trap but pretending it was a fashion choice. Drac glanced at him, skepticism dripping from his voice. "Your last plan nearly got us all incinerated." "What's changed?" "Good point, Captain," Valen conceded, "but hear me out. I've been thinking." Sella snorted from her seat, sharpening a knife with the focus of someone imagining it was being drawn across Valen's neck. "That's dangerous, you should have warned us." Valen gave her a mock salute. "Duly noted." "But here's the thing, I think we've been going about this all wrong." Grom's metallic voice buzzed from behind the console. "If this is another one of those leap into chaos and hope for the best speeches, count me out." "Not quite," Valen replied, a spark of mischief twinkling in his eyes. "We've been playing by the rules. They're rules. But what if we started making up our own?" Drac folded his arms, doing his best impression of a stone gargoyle minus the charm. "And what exactly do you propose?" Valen glanced around the room, the weight of his plan balancing on the edge of his grin. "We hit them where it hurts, not with guns or brute force but with unpredictability. We make them think we're somewhere we're not. Create decoys, play them like a rigged card game. It'll be a beautiful mess." Sella's eyes narrowed, calculating the odds like a gambler who'd seen too many losing hands. "You think that'll work? They're not idiots." Valen shrugged. "Neither are we, but they don't know that. Besides, humans have one redeeming quality. Being unpredictably idiotic is practically a genetic trait." Drac's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile brushing his lips. "You want us to gamble everything on confusion and chaos. Welcome to the new normal," Valen said, spreading his arms wide like a magician unveiling his latest trick. "Our supplies are dwindling and morale's circling the drain. We need a win. Something to remind us we're not just passengers on a doomed flight." Drac considered, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like an ill-fitting coat. "It's risky. Aren't all the best things," Valen countered. "And if we pull it off, we'll have enough supplies to last until we're old and gray, or at least until the next ill-advised venture." Sella sheathed her knife, her expression a mix of reluctance and intrigue. "I'll admit throwing them off balance might be fun, but we need everyone on board." Valen nodded, knowing this was the moment to sell his harebrained scheme. "Grom, can you rig the engines to create a few ghost signals? Make it look like we've split into 3 ships." Grom's metallic throat rasped a laugh. "I could make it look like we're an entire fleet if you give me enough duct tape and sheer stubbornness." "Excellent," Valen said, clapping his hands together. "And Sella, I need you to spread some rumors on the comms channels. Make it seem like we're planning a heist on a juicy convoy. Something irresistible." Sella smirked, already crafting the tales that would send their enemies chasing shadows. "I'm on it." "Nothing like a little misinformation to spice up the cosmos." Drac exhaled, the decision made. "All right, let's do it. But if this goes south, I want everyone ready to fight or flee. No heroics." Valen gave a mock bow. "Heroics aren't really my style. I prefer cunning plans and dumb luck." With the plan set, the crew dispersed, each member knowing their part in the unfolding act. Valen watched them go, a sense of purpose rekindling a spark that had nearly burned out. As the ironclad's engines roared to life, Valen felt the familiar thrill of chaos beckoning. This was what he lived for, the edge of disaster, the dance of chance. Sella joined him at the viewport, eyes on the stars as they began their deceptive waltz. "You really think this will work?" she asked, voice low. Valen shrugged, the picture of casual confidence. "Well, if it doesn't, we'll be too dead to care. Look on the bright side." She chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. "I guess that's one way to look at it." The ship sped into the void, leaving behind a trail of false signals and rumors. Valen could already imagine the chaos they'd sow, the confusion that would reign among their enemies. And for the first time in weeks, he felt alive. Hours later, as they monitored the comms, the first signs of success trickled in. Reports of enemy ships scrambling, changing courses, chasing ghosts. It was working, and the crew's morale lifted with each new confirmation. Drac watched the scene unfold, his usual stoicism softened by cautious optimism. "Maybe this mad plan of yours isn't so mad after all," he admitted begrudgingly. Valen grinned, savoring the rare praise. "Who knew a little madness was all we needed?" Grom's voice crackled through the comms, a note of pride audible even through the distortion. "We've got them chasing their tails." I gotta say, it's a masterpiece of misdirection. The crew gathered on the bridge, watching as the enemy scattered, chasing phantoms in every direction. It was a sight to behold, a testament to human ingenuity and sheer audacity. Sella leaned against the console, watching Valen with a newfound respect. "You might just have saved our skins." Valen shrugged, feigning nonchalance. all in a day's work for a misunderstood genius. As the ironclad slipped away from the chaos they'd created, a sense of camaraderie settled over the crew. They had pulled off the impossible, and for once, the future seemed less like a death sentence and more like a challenge worth facing. Drac turned to address his crew, his voice carrying the weight of leadership. "We've bought ourselves some time and maybe a little hope. Let's make the most of it." Valen raised an imaginary glass once more, a grin plastered on his face. "To surviving another day, may our enemies always be dumber than us." Laughter erupted, the shared humor a balm for their frayed nerves. For now they had outsmarted the universe, and that was enough. As the ironclad continued its journey through the stars, Valen felt the call of adventure stir within him once more. The galaxy was vast and uncharted, and there were more risks to take, more gambles to make. And he, for one, couldn't wait. With the ship's course set and the immediate danger behind them, the crew turned their attention to the next steps. There were supplies to gather, repairs to make, and plans to be laid for whatever lay ahead. Valen found himself in the engine room, Grom tinkering away with a focus that bordered on obsession. The hum of machinery was a comforting lullaby, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, some things remained constant. Grom looked up, his metallic voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "You really believe we can keep this up, tricking them, staying one step ahead?" Valen leaned against the wall, considering the question. "Who knows? Maybe we'll run out of luck. But then again, maybe we'll make our own." Grom nodded, the clatter of his enhanced voice somehow reassuring. "I like it, keeps things interesting." "That's the idea," Valen replied, feeling the warmth of camaraderie in this ragtag group of misfits. The ship's systems hummed around them, a symphony of life and mechanical precision. For now they were safe, and though the future was uncertain, it was theirs to shape. Sella joined them, her ever-present cynicism softened by the day's success. "You think we'll ever get out of this mess for good?" Valen chuckled, a sound full of mischief and possibility. "Probably not, but we'll give the universe a run for its money trying." As the three of them stood there, united in their shared struggle, Valen felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known he craved. They were a family of sorts, bound by the stars and the constant dance with danger. And in that moment, he wouldn't have traded it for anything. The ironclad sailed on, a ship of fools and dreamers defying the odds in a universe that never played fair. But as long as they had each other and a penchant for chaos, they'd keep fighting. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving, thriving, and laughing in the face of doom. And for Valen Dart, that was the best kind of victory. The ironclad streaked through the void, a bruised and battered tin can held together by sheer defiance and a crew who couldn't take a hint. The plan, Valen's plan if things went south, was in motion, and everyone was busy doing their part to ensure that south was just a direction, not their destination. Valen stood at the helm, the star maps flickering in holographic glory before him. He liked to think they made him look important, though Drac's expression suggested he looked more like a kid playing dress-up in his father's boots. But who cared? Valen was the architect of this beautiful disaster, and he was going to see it through, or go down trying, which was also an option. Sella sidled up, her knife out and already sharpening imaginary adversaries into fine confetti. "How's our genius plan panning out, oh mastermind?" "Like a dream," Valen replied, showing off teeth that hadn't seen a dentist in years. "Assuming your dreams involve a lot of running and screaming." Grom, tinkering with the radar, crackled a laugh through his robotic voice box. "You sure you don't want to reconsider?" "There's always time to admit this is all lunacy." "Lunacy is just another word for freedom," Valen retorted, though he suspected Grom had a point. "Besides, you're the one who made us look like an entire fleet. That's a work of art." "It's also a bloody mess," Drac growled, arms crossed in a posture that said he was done with everyone's nonsense. "If those decoy signals don't hold, we're sitting ducks." Valen waved a hand, all carefree confidence. "The universe loves a good underdog story. Plus, if it doesn't work, we'll be too vaporized to care." The crew watched the star maps, dots of enemy ships darting every which way like ants after a rainstorm. The outpost surveillance systems had been fooled, believing them to be a legion instead of a lone, desperate ship. It was working. Plan Valen was actually working. Drax's stone facade cracked, allowing a glimpse of a grudgingly impressed commander. You managed to confuse them. I'll give you that. Confusion is our ally, Valen said, pretending to be wise. Like the philosopher said, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention, Sella snorted. Pretty sure no philosopher ever said that. Then I'll take the credit, Valen replied, shrugging. The ironclad's engines rumbled, steady and resolute, as the ship darted towards the target convoy, now left unprotected by ships chasing phantoms. It was a ballet of chaos, the crew's deception weaving a dance of mayhem among their foes. Grom's voice crackled again, this time with the satisfaction of a job well done. The outpost is blind. They're scrambling to make sense of it all. Just how I like it, Valen replied, feeling the adrenaline buzz through his veins like a particularly strong shot of espresso. Blind, confused, and utterly bamboozled. Sella flicked her knife closed, her skepticism giving way to something resembling hope. If we pull this off, you'll go down in history as something other than a nuisance. I've always wanted to be a legend, Valen said, raising his imaginary glass to the stars. As the ironclad approached the convoy, the crew sprang into action. They needed supplies, and this was their chance. The enemy ships were off chasing ghosts, and for once, Valen didn't mind being the specter of their nightmares. Positions, everyone, Drac barked, taking command with the authority of a man who was used to being obeyed, even if he still couldn't quite believe it was happening. Valen watched as his motley crew moved with precision, each member playing their part in this cosmic con job. They were pirates, outlaws, and misfits, but they were his pirates, outlaws, and misfits, and he wouldn't trade them for the galaxy. The ironclad slid into formation, the convoy ripe for the picking. It was a tense moment, the kind of scene you'd find in an old heist movie where the heroes, if you could call them that, are one wrong move away from disaster. Drax's voice cut through the silence. Remember, quick and clean. Grab what we need and get out. No unnecessary heroics. Heroics are for fools, Sella muttered, checking her weapons with the precision of a surgeon. We're just here for the loot. Valen chuckled, loving the irony of it all. Who needs heroics when you've got chaos on your side? With that, they descended on the convoy, each crew member executing their part of the plan with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Or maybe a jury-rigged one held together by incompetence, but who was Valen to judge? The operation was swift, a blur of movement and cunning that left the convoy stripped and the ironclad stocked for another day of survival. It was risky, it was reckless, and it was utterly brilliant. As they pulled away, leaving the convoy behind in a state of bewildered helplessness, Valen felt a surge of triumph. They'd done it. They'd pulled off the impossible, and for once the universe hadn't spat them back out like a bad meal. Drax surveyed the spoils, a rare smile ghosting his lips. I can't believe it, Valen said, savoring the moment. We just pulled off a heist with nothing but smoke and mirrors. Sella leaned against a bulkhead, her eyes bright with the thrill of success. So, what now? We can't keep this up forever. That's the beauty of it, Valen replied, feeling a sense of purpose that had been missing for far too long. As long as they keep underestimating us, we'll stay one step ahead. Grom joined them, his metallic voice buzzing with amusement. I never thought I'd say this, but I think I actually enjoy working with you lot. Valen laughed, a sound full of mischief and camaraderie. Don't worry, Grom, the feeling's mutual. Just remember, we may be chaos incarnate, but we're damn good at it. The crew gathered, their victory a balm to the wounds of their past failures. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by shared adversity and a penchant for trouble. But in that moment, they were invincible. Drac addressed them, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much but wasn't ready to give up. We've got supplies and we've got a plan. Let's make the most of it, and remember, stay unpredictable. Valen raised his imaginary glass once more, a grin playing on his lips. to chaos, confusion, and confounding the bastards. Laughter filled the bridge, a sound of triumph and defiance that echoed through the ship. They'd pulled off the impossible, and for now, that was enough. As the ironclad sailed on, the crew turned their thoughts to the journey ahead. There were more battles to fight, more gambles to make, and more chaos to sow. But for now, they had each other, and in the end, that was what mattered. Valen watched the stars, a sense of belonging settling over him like a familiar cloak. They were pirates, outlaws, and dreamers, but together they were unstoppable. And as long as they had a plan, no matter how crazy or impossible, they'd keep fighting. Because in a universe that didn't care, they cared enough to keep trying. With the ship's course set and the crew united in purpose, the ironclad sailed into the unknown, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that preferred despair. But as long as Valen had his crew and a penchant for chaos, he'd keep fighting for a future worth living. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to beat the odds and carve out a place for themselves among the stars. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving, thriving, and laughing in the face of doom. And for Valen Dart, that was the best kind of victory. The ironclad sailed through space like a hunk of scrap metal that had somehow conned its way into the fast lane. Captain Drac stood on the bridge, arms crossed, staring at Valen Dart with an expression that could peel paint off the walls. The battered ship, once a mere pirate vessel, had somehow managed to outsmart an entire outpost, leaving Drac no choice but to begrudgingly acknowledge Valen's madcap genius. "You know," Drac grumbled, "you might be onto something with this chaotic strategy of yours." Valen, never one to miss an opportunity for self-aggrandizement, flashed a toothy grin. "Glad you noticed, Captain. I'd hate for all my genius to go to waste." Sella snorted from her spot by the bulkhead, where she was still toying with her knife like it was a child's toy. "Genius is one word for it. I'd have gone with reckless or suicidal, but hey, whatever gets us through the day." "Reckless genius," Valen corrected, because double the adjectives meant double the credit. Grom, tinkering with a panel that seemed just as likely to explode as it was to function, chimed in with his usual robotic candor. "If we keep up this pace, we'll need a new plan every day. Or a new ship, once this one falls apart." The ironclad had seen better days, but thanks to their latest escapade, it was also stocked with enough supplies to keep them from having to eat each other. Always a bonus in space travel. "I reckon we might have earned ourselves a little breathing room," Drac said, almost as if he believed it. "Might be time to chart a new course, leave the pirate life behind." "To where?" Sella asked, skeptical as ever. "Places like this universe don't exactly roll out the welcome mat." Valen leaned on the helm, his star maps twinkling like a broken Christmas tree. "How about exploring? Find some uncharted planets, maybe declare ourselves kings and queens of the dirt piles we discover." "Sounds ambitious," Drac replied. "But ambition's gotten us this far. I say we look for new alliances. Maybe someone out there's crazy enough to join forces with the likes of us." Valen nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. The galaxy's full of folks who love a good underdog, and who knows? Maybe there's a place out there where lunacy is celebrated. "And if there isn't," Sella said, "we can always bring the party to them." Drac chuckled, a sound that was rare and almost alarming. "You've all gone mad, haven't you? But I'll be damned if I don't prefer it to the alternative." With a new plan in mind, or at least a new direction, the ironclad set a course towards the unknown. The crew, a motley collection of outlaws and dreamers, had always thrived on unpredictability. Now they were about to lean into it with all the grace of a drunk stumbling through a minefield. As the stars streaked by, Valen took the opportunity to reflect on their predicament. "You know, this ship's seen more action than most starfaring vessels. It's a wonder it hasn't fallen apart. It's held together by duct tape and pure spite," Sella said, rolling her eyes. "Ain't that right, Grom?" Grom paused in his tinkering, his mechanical voice laced with amusement. "And a healthy dose of wishful thinking. But sure, let's call it engineering." "Whatever it is," Valen said, It's kept us flying. And as long as it keeps working, we'll keep pushing our luck. The ironclad was a symbol of human ingenuity, if you could call a ramshackle, barely functioning ship that. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs, and it had taken them through thick and thin. Mostly thin, if they were honest. Drax shifted his gaze from the helm to the vast expanse of stars beyond. You ever think about the future? What comes next for us? Surviving, Sella said. Thieving, maybe a bit of plundering, you know, the usual. But maybe we could aim for more, Valen suggested. Like making ourselves a name out there, not just as pirates, but as, I dunno, pioneers. Bold move, Grom noted. Seeing as how we're known for taking more than we give. Then maybe it's time to give something back, Drac mused. Show the universe we're more than just a bunch of scoundrels. Speak for yourself, Sella quipped, though there was a twinkle in her eye. I've got a reputation to uphold. Fine, Valen conceded. Maybe not saints, but at least chaotic good. We could do worse. They could indeed, and they had on numerous occasions. But as the ironclad sailed into the unknown, the promise of a fresh start hung in the air like the smell of burnt toast, faint but unmistakable. First things first, Drac announced. We find a place to refuel and regroup. Maybe see if there are any friendly faces left in this corner of the galaxy. Friendly faces, Valen repeated, savoring the irony. In space. Now that's a dream. But dreams, however unlikely, were worth chasing. The universe had never played fair, but neither had they, and that was something. As the crew settled into their routines, each member took a moment to consider their new course. Valen watched his comrades with a sense of pride. Misfits they might be, but they were his misfits. Hey, Grom, Valen called over. Think we'll find any welcoming arms out there? Unlikely, Grom replied. But maybe we'll find someone who appreciates our brand of insanity. Here's hoping, Valen said, adjusting the star maps with a flourish. Because if there's one thing this universe needs, it's more of us. Sella sheathed her knife, her expression one of amused skepticism. And if we don't find it, then we make it, Valen said, with the kind of certainty that bordered on foolishness. Because if we've learned anything, it's that sometimes you have to create your own opportunities. Drac nodded, his expression one of resolve. We're not just surviving anymore. We're looking to make a mark. With chaos and style, Valen added. We're the ironclad after all. Unlikely as it seems. The ship, once a symbol of desperation, had become something more. It was a testament to their resilience, their defiance, and their refusal to be cowed by a universe that didn't care. As the ironclad continued its journey, the crew remained united by a common goal, to find a place where they could be more than just outlaws. Maybe they'd find it, or maybe they'd have to build it from scratch. Either way, they were ready. Valen glanced at the star maps, feeling a sense of anticipation. To new beginnings, then. To chaos, Sella corrected, raising an imaginary glass. To kicking the universe's ass, Grom added, with a tone that was almost jovial. Drac joined in, his voice steady and sure. And to making the most of it. Laughter echoed through the bridge, a shared understanding that they'd face whatever challenges came their way together. They might not have had a clear path, but they had each other, and sometimes that was enough. As the ironclad soared into the unknown, Valen couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, a dangerous thing in a universe that thrived on crushing dreams. But they'd defied the odds before, and they were more than ready to do it again. Because in the end, it wasn't about where they came from or what they'd done. It was about where they were going and who they'd become along the way. And for Valen Dart and his crew, that was the best kind of adventure. With the ship's course set and the crew united in purpose, the ironclad sailed into the unknown, a shining example of human tenacity in a galaxy that preferred despair. But as long as Valen had his crew and a penchant for chaos, he'd keep fighting for a future worth living. As they traveled, the stars stretched out before them, each one a potential destination, a new opportunity waiting to be seized. There were risks ahead, but they'd never shied away from danger before. If anything, they'd thrived on it. And so, with a plan as patchwork as their ship, the ironclad ventured forth, ready to face whatever the cosmos threw their way. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving, thriving, and laughing in the face of doom. And for Vale and Dart, that was the best kind of victory.